Hello, I'm Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to your education program, the program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, institutions, and organizations involved in the business of higher education in the United States and around the world. Today we'll be talking about education news. My guests are two leaders in the field of education journalism. Maya Minter is Vice President for Editorial and Production and Executive Manager for Diverse Issues in Higher Education, a national news magazine serving higher education and the public since 1984. She is a University of Virginia graduate and a former Fulbright education advisor. Doug Lederman is editor of Inside Higher Ed, a daily online education news outlet that covers higher education. Doug is responsible for editorial operations and news content. He is a Princeton University graduate and the winner of 3 national awards for education reporting from the Education Writers Association. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Nice to be here.
Thanks. Thanks. And if I could start with you, Maya, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about, how you view education news and what your, what your organization does and what diverse issues is supposed to cover and what you view it as covering and how it serves the public or a specialized audience.
Okay, well thank you, Stephen, for that question and for the invitation to be here. And I would say that our primary audience at Diverse Issues in Higher Education is definitely the higher education audience itself. So we go directly to faculty, administrators, even students at the undergraduate, graduate, professional, and postdoctoral levels. So we also, with an emphasis on those students that are at the graduate and the doctoral level, because another big part of our readership are job seekers, those who are looking to find employment opportunities within the academy, and then on the other side, employers, so those looking to find candidates who are looking to fill slots at different colleges and universities. So the primary core is really higher education. We also have found that a big part of our major audience is policymakers, the policy wonks, if you will. And that's because we've gotten a lot of feedback over time that they find news that they cannot find otherwise in our publication. So a lot of the people on the Hill have turned to us to rely on information that they can't really find in other outlets. So we really we credit that, and we're thankful that we have 2 beat reporters that cover the Hill exclusively. So we really have that as kind of an extension of our niche. So that's what we do. We reach 3,800 colleges and universities across the country. We do that with paid subscriptions, a circulation list. So these are delivered directly to the mailboxes or the desks, if you will, of subscribers. And that's our primary core niche audience. Larger audience, though, is everyone else that we can reach outside of those receiving the physical magazine. So, really anyone interested in the role of education and how education is being played out right now in the context of the changing demographics and the diverse nation that we live in now would find the type of topics that we cover interesting, and we are able to reach much larger audience through our web presence.
Right. Well, that's great. And Doug, if you wouldn't mind saying a word or two about your about Inside Higher Ed.
Sure. We're a 6-year-old web publication. We created ourselves to be online, daily, and free. Those are our sort of buzzwords. And we really set out, we are like Diverse, a professional publication. Most of our readers, probably 85 to 90%, are people who work in and around higher education and read us so that they can do their jobs better every day. And we provide news and commentary and career advice to help them do that. But in this era of Google and the internet, because our content's online and free, there's really no boundaries to who can read us. And so every time, if we write a story about a particular college and somebody has a Google News alert set up to get everything related to that college, they're going to find out about us. So we find our traffic comes a lot from outside the higher ed universe. And we have about 90,000 email subscribers who get our daily email every morning, and about 750,000 unique users come to our website every month, and a good 10 to 20% of those are from the public. So our content is focused much more than, say, the Washington Post or another daily newspaper. higher education tends to be covered as a consumer beat. Where can my kids get financial aid? What schools should I go to, or should my kid go to? We write about policy issues, and like Diverse, write about what the politics of higher education, the business of higher education, but again with a professional bent, but knowing that it can be read by anybody, and so we write in an accessible way, so it's not filled with the kind of jargon that academics like to talk in.
Mm-hmm. But how would you compare your coverage then to the Washington Post? So obviously there's no one here from the Post today,
right? Sure.
Or the Philadelphia Inquirer or any
right.
other newspaper.
Well, again, it's going to be much more focused on. I mean, if you look at there's a tendency of a lot of local newspapers, or certainly the national newspapers, write very heavily about a very select set of institutions. They write about the Ivy League, they write about the places that the reporters want to send their kids to, or their editors want to send their kids to, or that they think their readers want to send their kids to. We're just as inclined to write about community colleges and other institutions that may not be at the top of the selectivity list, but are doing the heavy lifting in higher education. So we're much more likely to write about the issues that are underlying them, rather than underlying the situation, rather than just the sort of sexy bullet points that are going to make it into the local paper usually.
Fair enough. And Maya, how would you answer that question?
I would answer actually very similarly. We unlike the dailies, we're going to give you a different lens. We are looking at, the full breadth of colleges and universities, not, the big sexy ones that you see in the bylines all the time, but we're looking at what's happening at two-year schools, junior technical schools. We're looking at minority-serving institutions, historically black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, and looking at the role that they're playing in education overall today too. Again, you might not see as much news out there, but we're going to give you a deeper lens and always give you that angle to assessing education and what's going on in terms of those populations that you might not see otherwise, or at least exclusively with that consistent as a beat.
Well, that brings to the question of the issue of what happens when there's a sensitive topic. So there's a scandal at a school, and that's an important school that you're covering. How do you handle that in terms of kind of the controversies of what's going on campus versus the potential loss of advertising, or the loss of or you're harming the reputation of somebody who you cover a lot?
Yeah, well, you have to be very sensitive as a journalist, I think, and as a news organization. So we've had just a number of issues that come immediately to mind when I think about sensitive things we've had to cover. We do a print publication, so we do daily e-news that we're doing, but we also do a print publication that reaches our readers every other week or 26 times a year. And so that's a full-scale cover, 8.5 glossy. So that's one area that we have to be particularly sensitive in. And so if we are looking at things that have some sensitivity from a cultural perspective, we always have to look at the imagery and the wording. We did a cover on Uncle Tom, and we did a cover on use of the N-word, and just having a scholarly approach to what people in the academy are saying about that. So we have to, watch how that's couched and positioned, because, just like it's a hotbed issue in the general public, it also would be for our readers. I can say that I think one of the most sensitive topics that we've had to cover since our founding in 1984 as Black Issues in Higher Education is changing our name. So we were founded in 1984 as Black Issues in Higher Education, and now we're Diverse Issues in Higher Education. That's the evolution, of the brand of the publication. So I'd say that one was particularly sensitive to us. It was, in some degree, just kind of moving forward with what we've always been doing. We've always been inclusive. We've always covered other race and ethnicities in our publication, although it was called Black Issues in Higher Education. But it was a practical matter of moving on, the economics. We're we get a public support for our ads and for our revenue base, and so at that time, you're getting the message that anything that's race specific can't be supported. So that was a tough one. That was sensitive. That was sensitive to us because we're an African American company. It was sensitive to our readers, but as a matter of survival, it's something that we had to do. But it was very hard to kind of throw away, the brand and the name recognition of to that, 20 plus years. But so I'd say that was very sensitive for us, but something that we've tackled, and gotten great feedback, and we're excited that we did that, but that was a sensitive thing that we had to do, filled with a lot of great reflection, sensitive for us and our readers, but we are continuing forth, and we have the same commitment as we always have had when we were founded, and continue that and more with our publication now.
Fair enough. And Doug, how would you look at that issue?
I mean, we're journalists first, and journalists, obviously the business side matters, but we have so many colleges and companies and others that advertise with us that even if we offend somebody or write something that somebody doesn't like, it's just the way it is, and they can get over it, or they can. I mean, we're at the point, I think, where they need us as much as we need them, and so we're gonna, as long as we've been fair and balanced in how we approach what we do and professional, and we really don't. We have to cover the news and cover the issues as we see them unfolding. So.
Which brings me to the question of what is news, and so, and I know you're a UVA graduate, Maya, and so there's been a number of scandals that have affected the University of Virginia recently, and one very serious one involving somebody who died. How would you cover that in a way that would be different, that is different from a daily newspaper or another organization?
Well, if you don't mind, we covered it. We wrote about what happened, but we also put it in context for people in higher education. We examined issues of sort of how colleges deal with criminal behavior, or potentially criminal behavior. We talked about their responsibility. We talked about whether there's we've written various articles over the years about whether athletes, whether there's a physicality in athletics that can sometimes result in more violence than are athletes more responsible, more likely to get engage in criminal behavior. I think there's a lot of mixed evidence about that, but we talked about the sort of physicality that a lot of athletes are trained to use in their sports, and sometimes the difficulty they have in knowing where those boundaries are. So most of the time what we're going to be doing is trying to take and I'm sure people think we sometimes are sensationalistic too, but we really try to take an ideas-based approach to journalism, and sort of, again, given that we're writing for an audience of educators, we're looking at sort of what they can learn about a situation like this. And we had the president of UVA in our office last week, and just for a sit down, and we asked her about this and how she'd recovered. She came in right as that was unfolding. And so that's the thing, you can't, if you're a journalist, you can't shy away from the difficult issues.
Maya, you thought on that?
Yeah, I had some thoughts on that as well. At first, I am a UVA alum. It was a very, very unfortunate situation that happened there with what happened to Yardley. But two things I wanted to comment about how we handle something like that. So we're never going to beat the big guys, if you will, on speed of news and time of delivery, just because how news is handled nowadays. So, we probably wouldn't be the news organization to break something like that. But where we kind of differentiate ourselves is on second-day leads. So we'll go back to that story and kind of put, the diverse angle on it, or a lens to take that story and look a little deeper at it. So what we would do with a story like that is attached to the initial, news peg about what happened, some of the underlying issues. And to that incident, I think the big underlying issue was domestic violence and sexual violence against women, and relationship violence that happens on colleges and universities. And that's an increasing trend. And so we actually did a cover story for Women's History Month the previous year to this incident happening at UVA. So we'd run the story, but then put a link or some type of pullover to that to engage our readers in a threaded discussion, or kind of get the discussion more robust on what's happening in terms of these trends and domestic violence at colleges and universities. And so in that edition, we looked at schools that have been experiencing this. We looked overall, we looked particularly how it has been playing out at HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. So that was a way to marry the current event with some trends, and look at all types of schools that are experiencing this, and kind of broaden the conversation through that angle. So that's how we would handle an event or something like that.
And fair enough. Would you allow an anonymous source in a discussion like that?
Well, like everything, yes and no. So as a rule of thumb, editorially, we do not use anonymous sources. However, if there is a vital piece of information that we're just not going to find, and it's vital to a story or something that we feel our readers can benefit from, we will use an anonymous source. So, moving aside from that example a little bit, we had an article on the DREAM Act, and as you know, the DREAM Act is one of the pieces of legislation that President Obama was not able to push through in kind of the final last days of the previous Congress. And so there's a lot of reaction on the Hill, and we had some tidbits of information being passed about what was happening there. And so we found, for example, that the congressmen or women themselves can't say anything about what was happening in the state of the DREAM Act. But their aides, their staff aides, those are very knowledgeable people, but because they're just aides, they don't have the liberty to go on the record. So for that article, and in fact that was in our last edition, on January 20th, we used anonymously what the aide was able to say about the state of the DREAM Act and the passage, or in this case, the non-passage of the act.
And actually, from where you sit, what do you, since you've probably been talking to a lot of people about this, and there are a number of people who watch our show who care very much about the DREAM Act. If you don't mind saying a word or two about what you think about is going to happen with the DREAM Act, if anything.
Well, that's if anything. We'll see. It's very unfortunate, I think, that it didn't pass. That's my own personal opinion about it. But I think now it's really going to push the focus onto kind of this state-by-state response, because there's a lot of immigration issues that really underlie the underpinnings of the DREAM Act. And so now it's going to be interesting to see states like Maryland follow suit with what North Carolina did in terms of offering financial aid or in-state tuition for undocumented students. So I think that's the key issue. It kind of has I think made the discussion go more back to, is this going to rely on a state-to-state approach, and are we going to see this now played out like we did in Arizona, state by state, to finally get to this, or is there going to be this federal approach to go in and finally get this thing solved? So I think that's the key. The state's role and how this is going to play out in a state-by-state basis is really going to be big news now that the act did not pass.
Right. And Doug, do you have a thought or two about anonymous sources or the DREAM Act?
Well, I mean, the interesting part of the anonymity question, I mean, we have pretty much the same approach that sounds like Diverse has. We will, on occasion, use anonymous sources if we think it's the only way to get information. We obviously always know who it is, and we have a pretty high bar. The interesting thing is that we allow comments on the bottom of every story, like a lot of websites do. We very closely monitor that, and we don't let, we have to approve every comment, but we let people comment without their names attached. We have a lot of adjunct professors who read our website who don't really have any job security whatsoever. And we have people ask about that, but I think that's a question that we're in relatively early stage of this web journalism environment, and I think it's something that a lot of web publications are wrestling with, is sort of how to maneuver there and what kinds of, we really like it. We like the open conversation, the sort of small d democracy of a website where anybody can participate and sort of contribute to the content, essentially. But democracy is messy, and when you open the door, you can have some control over who walks in, but we try and set a bar that says you can't attack other people and you have to stay on point, but everybody's definition of that is slightly different. So.
And that's what I was going to, please.
I was just going to piggyback on just what he was saying, and it kind of registered when you were talking about the comments at the end of the page, and to an earlier question about sensitivity and type of sensitive things you have to be sensitive for in this business of journalism. So now, in this new environment of news, that's one. So like you said, you have to look and approve every comment that goes on, because a sensitive topic is you'll have people with a really good point, but it's just laden with profanity and just things that shouldn't be said or that's going to inflame another reader. And so now that's another part of being sensitive, watching what goes up on your posts, just on your comments. And when you're getting those in earnest, that's kind of hard to do, but it really kind of raises the bar in terms of being, even though it's not your product, it's on your page, and so we have to be sensitive.
Well, you're legally responsible
you're liable,
too,
yes,
for anything that appears on your website, whether you said it or not. If it appears on your website, it's yours. It's your problem.
Well, but let's get back to the issue of the sensitive notion of this per se. If you think about a few years ago, I'm sure you both remember I believe it was the Adelphi University president had a lot of back pay coming, And if I'm not mistaken, it showed that his salary was astronomically higher than everybody else's that year. But so that was a fact for that year, but it wasn't necessarily in context. How did you cover that?
Well, back at my old publication, I broke that story. As you know, we used to do it. We did an annual survey of how much college presidents earn. The context. I mean, I don't want to. Context is hugely important, and that's actually what. Even though we publish on a daily basis, we're a newfangled publication in that we're only on the web, but we publish once a day. We don't update our website constantly with little tidbits of news that may or may not the next day be proven to be accurate or inaccurate. We have a very sort of old-fashioned approach to journalism. We publish once a day, every morning. And there's one of the issues that we're in as an industry is that we as journalists, I'm speaking at a macro level, are trying to figure out what news is today and what the publication's role is in an era of Twitter and Facebook when anybody with a smartphone can be a publisher of information. It's very difficult to figure out which news do you trust, which sources of information do you trust, and so I think there is it's a very painful time for journalism because a lot of business models aren't working, and a lot of publications that we've all known for a long time are either disappearing or collapsing. There are new publications emerging, but we're in this relatively early stage. We're figuring out what's legitimate. There's a lot more. It's a lot easier to be a publisher now. It used to be that you needed a printing press and a big distribution network, and now, if you have because of the internet, which is great. I think in general for our society, it's a good thing, but it requires consumers to be much smarter about information literacy, and frankly, we do a very bad job of teaching that to our kids and doing that ourselves.
And then since we are based at a university, I was going to ask you this later, but maybe we can spend a second on this. What advice would you have for students who are thinking about entering the field of journalism? Perhaps I can throw that to both of you.
Well, I guess the obvious is you want to be a journalism student, you want to be good at writing. That probably goes without saying, command of English and the English language, but also oral communication as well, because you need to be able to speak and communicate to your sources and explain what you're doing and get the information that you need to have. I'd say you need to be a very resourceful person in terms of getting contacts and be able to get out there and turn a story and put all of the pieces that you need together. So I think those are all important. I think, as Doug was alluding to, any student or any person interested in entering journalism should understand that journalism is undergoing evolution. It's changing. It is really it's really in the midst of an evolution. How news is delivered, what is the news, and almost information overload out there. So I would advise students to be aware of that and know that it's not enough today now to just write a story. So I would think that students need to be entrepreneurial minded, and so that when you're thinking of any story, you think about the whole package. How can you sell that story? How can you position that story? How can you add some visual elements, audio elements, multimedia elements? Because it's really just not enough nowadays to just have the story itself when you have the web and all these visual mediums to tell a story. So if you're competing in print, like you said, the margins are so thin now. Pages are at a premium. So you really have to have a unique story that you can do a lot more with than just tell that story. And the same goes for the web. So I would encourage students to think through that piece and the multimedia section of journalism, and that's important. And then last, I kind of touched base with my editor on this question, and she was telling me she touches base with a recruiter regularly. We're looking to fill a position now. So he's a recruiter for one of the major news clearinghouses. So he talks to the students, the journalism students, these are undergrad students, and the people that are trying to fill positions. And he said, he was talking with a journalism professor the other day, and he was saying, it's just a shame that journalism students aren't reading the news themselves. And he used the anecdote of, he was teaching a class, this is what he said to the recruiter, of his journalism students. And out of 22 people in this class, only 8 knew the name Jared Loughner. And of course, Jared Loughner is the person who committed these atrocities in Arizona in front of the Safeway grocery store, just last month. And so the fact that the students didn't know that, he's saying, hey, if you're interested in this field, be well read. You know, you got to stay up with the news, and there's or at least with this professor's anecdote was that there's a trend where the journalism students themselves aren't keeping up with the news. So if you're interested in that, keep up with it. You know, read the niche publications, the specific things like we do, higher education news, general news, and healthcare news, and just be aware of trends, and that's going to give you a better informed approach to your studies as a journalism student.
I think that's good advice. Thank you.
I mean, I'm frankly slightly surprised that there are as many people flocking to journalism school still as there are. I mean, from everything we hear and read, enrollments are way up. I'm actually a believer in the long-term outcome of journalism. I think there will be a journalism on the other side. I think any of us who've been journalists for a while have seen a lot of victims of budget cuts, and a lot of people change careers and leave journalism, and it's a hard time. There are new models out there, and we consider ourselves one. There are new types of journalism entities that are sort of emerging with new models, but it's going to take, I'd say, a good decade probably for a sort of new ecology of journalism, of sort of publishing to emerge on the other side. And journalism is not the only industry going through it. The book publishing is. Higher education is affected by a lot of the same trends too, but I guess, and I do believe there will be a journalism on the other side, and I do think that even though, despite the changes in the medium, in the media through which news and information are being delivered, I do think that the core values haven't changed that much, and so I do think that anybody who wants to be a journalist still needs to care about doing research, interviewing skills, ethics. A lot of the same things. Even as the media change, I think the core values of what good journalism, what counts as good journalism, will stay the same.
Well, I think that's good. That's a good comment as well. And we're going to have to leave it at that. And first of all, the reason I invited you both here is because I believe, as someone who's been in this field for a long time, that you both are very, not only experienced journalists, but ethical journalists and reasonable journalists. So thank you both for being on the show, and thank you for your advice to our viewers. If you would like additional information about diverse issues in higher education or inside higher ed, please visit their websites at diverseeducation.com and insidehighered.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.